good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of our bi-weekly webinar series. I'm Dr. George Ozude of Time Health Capital, and of course, with me is Bayo Fasanya of Dr. Breathe Easy Capital, and together we are your hosts. This evening, we are excited to bring on Dr. Tom Burns of Presario Ventures, and he is our expert guest speaker for tonight. So in addition to being a personal friend and a mentor, Tom is an entrepreneur, a retired orthopedic surgeon, and a physician of the United States ski team. He has over 25 years of real estate experience and has acquired and developed over $500 million worth of real estate. He is the co-founder and principal of Presario Ventures, which is a private real estate company focused on apartment development and private equity and ventures. He is author of a best-selling personal finance book that should be required reading for all physicians, healthcare providers, and busy professionals called Why Doctors Don't Get Rich. He's a sought-after speaker and mentor to many and has been financially independent for over a decade. So we are excited to learn from his impressive journey as an orthopedic surgeon to a successful investment fund principal. Afterwards, we'll open the floor for Q and a great discussion. And with that, Tom, I'll let you take it away.
All right, guys, appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I know George actually did a nice little testimonial in the book. That's why he wants you to read it, because it was a great testimonial. That book was pretty much, it was designed to give hope and guidance to people. In fact, the way it came out was a friend of mine basically said, you should write a book. And this was somebody that wrote a pretty well-known book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he says, hey, you should write one too. And I fought him on it and said, no. Then decided, let me see if I can do something useful. All I did in that thing, George, was to take all the experience and all the many mistakes that I made and continue to make, quite honestly, to try to distill things down and try to keep people from making the same kind of mistakes I made, take a little inspiration from a few victories and do this thing. I did not know what I was doing, nor did I have much help. And so I bumped into a lot of dead ends and fell into a lot of potholes, but through the grace of God came out and everything worked out pretty okay. So none of us are perfect, neither am I. Appreciate a very pleasant introduction. You know, I got here by stubbing my toe a bunch of times and continue to do that.
Absolutely. I also wanted to let everyone know, as we learn about Tom's journey tonight, please use our chat function to ask questions. We can be asking questions throughout the hour. We can also come off microphone and come on camera if you feel comfortable to ask questions and learn about Tom's journey.
Tell you, go ahead, George.
I think one of the key questions I've asked you before, and I love hearing about it, I read about it in your book, is the experience that you've created for yourself, the clinical career and the day-to-day that you created for yourself as an orthopedic surgeon and an investor. I would love for you to describe your day-to-day, maybe 5 years into practice and 5 years before retiring from practice, and how that changed over the course of your career and the impact of investing and how that transpired.
Great question. I can't do the latter because I haven't been retired for 5 years, but I'll fake it. Yeah, thinking this all started back in training. George and I are both orthopedic surgeons. We got 5-year residencies. And so I got the tap from God. The light bulb went on for me in the middle of residency, and I figured I needed to look for something else. Wasn't able to do much about that because I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. So I just learned as much as I could. And then once I got into practice, probably 5 years into practice, I'd certainly paid off the relatively small bills that I had. I'd paid my parents back because I was broke when I got back to Austin, and paid my very small student loans, was still learning, was hanging out with people that were doing things that I wanted to do, which pretty much had fallen into real estate. Probably by 5 years, I had probably bought my first property or 2 or 3. I'm not sure. I got to look back at that, but a pretty auspicious start. My first property was a single 2-bedroom, 1-bath condominium on the West Campus of University of Texas. Not very impressive. So that's what I was doing. So this was in the 90s. I had a full-time orthopedic practice, and by 5 years in, I was pretty busy. For the clinical folks, I joined another guy that had lost a partner, and I was on salary plus bonus for a couple of years. So I did that, was just meeting people, taking call all the time, everywhere. I had And I learned from my partner to do these satellite offices. He was one of the few guys doing that. He'd travel an hour outside of town. And through him, I had these two out of town offices. So in one of those, I was their orthopedic coverage 24/7. They didn't have a pager. They didn't have a call schedule. They had my number tacked up on the wall. And so 24/7, I was taking call at this out of town hospital. They would call me anytime, day or night. I vividly remember lowering my bottom into the chair for Thanksgiving dinner when my pager or phone went off. And it was, of course, another hip fracture of the like 90 hip fractures I did that year. So that was my life. I was doing orthopedics. I'd finish it. I'll tell that story. I worked, I had surgery on Friday mornings, and then Friday afternoon, I had office. And so, as I was telling y'all before we started recording, that everybody knew that young Burns was in the office on Friday afternoons when they wanted to go out and play golf or hang out with their kids. So they'd send people in. And so I joked that my block time was at 5 o'clock Friday evening. I spent a lot of Friday nights doing hip fractures. When I did my real estate was on the weekends after I got out of work, which at that time was a full schedule. I'm not sure when it happened, but at some point, maybe around probably later than 5 years, I started taking those Friday afternoons off. And that was the start of it. I had just a little bit of passive income. It wasn't life-changing. It was almost not noticeable for a busy orthopedic surgeon, but it was coming in. Never touched it. I always let it grow inside the accounts, grow enough to where I could buy something else or invest in something else. I kept putting my money in there. So I took Friday afternoons off. That was a liberating experience. I felt like I was King Tut. I had 2.5 days of weekend unless I was on call. It was a big deal, but it was a quick win, George. It was a quick win that, the extra effort, the burning the candle at both ends was paying off some dividends, and I was getting a little something for it. So that was nice. So that was pretty much my life back then. I did the orthopedics, took the call, did the stuff, bought little things. There were not a lot or none were available to me. There weren't syndications available to me to put money into. All I knew was to go buy my own stuff. So I bought that student condominium and stumbled my way through it and didn't know anything I was doing. Bought another one and stumbled through that a little less, bought another. Pretty soon I got really good at that market and I could buy it sight unseen. I bought one sight unseen. I bought one for no money down because I knew more than the selling broker and more than the seller himself. So it's nice to get deep knowledge of the market. So now that just grew over time. That's all. It was just an organic growth. Partners came along, larger projects came along, things just grew organically. It's surprising what happens when you just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And then I reached a point probably around the great financial crisis, believe it or not, when my passive income eclipsed my orthopedic income. It didn't change much. It felt really good. I just kept doing orthopedics because I didn't have anything else to do. I did not retire until 2 years, didn't transition until 2 years ago because I simply ran out of time to do. I was doing the real estate stuff. I had a company to run. I was part of that. Had that leveraged out pretty nicely. And I started doing some other things in the educational space and talking to a lot of people, and it started taking up a lot of time. So the reason I stopped orthopedics was because I ran out of time. But it was set up beautifully at that time. I loved it. I had a friend who wasn't a doctor who called me an idiot because I was still working, because he said, "Why are you still working?" I said, "I love it." He said, "How much you get paid?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "You're an idiot." He's probably right. I probably am an idiot, but I literally was not getting paid. My paychecks were like $10,000 and $20,000 for 4 years in a row. That doesn't sound very smart, but what else was I going to do? I was having a good time. It was easy. I worked 2 to 5 mornings a week. I made just enough to cover my overhead. I had a great physician assistant. I could call him on Tuesday and say, "I'm not coming Wednesday." And I couldn't do that on surgery days, but so that was that life. So now flash forward, you said 5 years after retirement. So it's been 2 years.
I actually said 5 years before you retired. So I wanted to.
5 years. Oh,
Yeah.
see, so bad ears. I'm not listening.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's exactly what it was. 5 years before I retired, I was working 2 to 5 mornings a week, had a fantastic physician assistant. I had very little to do to run the practice. I did have to show up to meetings once a month where we figured out how horrible it was to run a practice. I did my thing in the mornings and then went out, and at that time, that's what I did. I did my stuff in the mornings, and I popped over to the Presario office, and we did our thing. It was nice. It was smooth. It was nice. We did a few little extra deals. The core is real estate, but we'll step out once in a while. And seems like every time I step out, it's a lesson, which is a nice way of saying I lose money, I get all that kind of stuff. Bought a restaurant. Can't recommend that unless you know what you're doing, which we didn't. We did that. I did that in the 5 years before I left. But that it was good times. It was just it was all I did. I traveled. I did the real estate through my company, and I tried to fix a few knees. And I was complacent, to be honest with you. I was traveling all over the world. I was doing some real estate. Now that I look back, I really wasn't giving back to the world. And so it was Kiyosaki who shook me a little bit and said, you need to do something extra. That's what got me on the new path.
It's awesome. Did you feel like it impacted your staff and your patients? Did you feel that difference as well?
Oh, absolutely. And that happened a long time. I'll tell you, I was told years ago, Tom, you should focus more on medicine. And I said, I focus 100% on medicine. If I'm in the office, there's nobody there but you and your knee or your shoulder or whatever I'm looking at. But when I'm done focusing on medicine, I focused on the extracurricular stuff, so to speak. So that's one thing. And that took extra work. I should have focused on medicine, and I was crazy for doing all that kind of stuff. And I should have gotten more referrals from the other doctors. But flash forward a bunch of years, now I'm lucky. It's you make your own luck. And what happened was when I got to a point where I didn't need to see a bunch of patients, I was able to spend more time with them. And it's pretty amazing when you sit down and really get to know people. And I have walked in that room. I have friends now that I met by walking in the room saying, hey, I'm Tom. I hear you have a sore knee. And now we go hunting together. We go on trips together. So you can meet some really good friends. We get to see 20, 30, 40 people, maybe more a day, depending on what you do. And that's a lot of people. That's a lot of humanity that you get to interact with. So it made me better. I could treat people and not have to care what their insurance was, how much they could pay. I treated every musician in Austin, Texas, it seemed like. Hyperbole there, but I treated a lot of musicians because they haven't got two nickels to rub together. And so now I got on the VIP list to get into a lot of shows in Austin for a while. So that was fun.
You go, so, yeah, barter system there.
Yeah, it was really cool. So I really enjoyed it. Funny story, my physician assistant I took right out of school. So he had an orthopedic. He'd done a month or two of orthopedics. And so I ended up teaching him orthopedics, and he was fabulous. He's probably smarter than I am. And he got a really high grade on the MCAT, but decided to be a PA. So he finishes working with me 12 and a half years and I stopped doing medicine. He goes to another group. They headhunted him and paid him a huge salary. He called me back. He said, get me out of here. He said, all they talk about is medicine. He said, I'm trying to tell them there's some ways he said they complain and talk about medicine. So now he's my personal assistant. But we were just talking today or yesterday that we truly, literally, really enjoyed going into the office. And I'm not lying to you. We had a great time because we didn't have to see patients that we didn't want to or didn't like. We didn't take call. We could work at any hospital we wanted. I built one, so I worked at that place. We had as much control, I think, as you can have in a medical practice. Certainly not full control. The insurance companies still hold the purse strings and the reins, but it was fun. It was fun, George.
Love it. Io, you're on mute.
Yep. Actually, thanks for that, because most of us, we're still dealing with that. Everybody in different phase of the transition right now. There are some that are moving into private practice. Some are building passive income to decrease their hours. But what is common among almost every physician that I've talked to is everybody wants some form of autonomy, right? Yeah. They want to be able to have more control, which is the main issue. So would you do it again? So you went straight to private practice, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay. So can you tell us how that transpired?
Yeah, sure. And we do want autonomy. And back, I don't know, it's not like I'm Father Time or something, but it was a while back when I went in and there were a lot less people that were employed, right? What is it, 76%, 60 to 76%? I've seen really high numbers of docs that are employed. It wasn't so much that way when I did it. And I'm just unemployable. I'll tell you how it went, but I found out in college, I was reasonably mildly entrepreneurial when I was young. I mowed lawns and taught tennis lessons. And then I get into college and I took a job that was in an office for the University of Texas. I did it for a summer. It was like being in prison. So I couldn't stand it. I knew that was not going to be for me. I did not want to take a job. I didn't want to be an academic guy. I was not very academic anyway, but had some job offers at various sports places after I got out. But I just wanted to come back to Austin, Texas. And so early in my residency training, I started sending letters to every group in town. Hi, I'm Tom Burns. I'm from Austin. I'm going to finish in 1,000 years. I'd like to come back to Austin. And as I told some folks earlier that they all wrote back and said, great, wish you the best of luck, but gee, we don't need any doctors in Austin. I kept doing that. And a few of them had me shadow them. You'd just walk around, put a white coat on and walk around. So nobody offered a job. Okay. And I finally told them, look, I'm going to hang a shingle. My friends, family, and parents are here. So I'm going to work in Austin. Then I had a bunch of job offers. So I picked somebody who was independent. It was just a 2-doctor practice, and he had lost his partner. So I jumped in with another guy. It was a 2-man practice, and we covered our own call, and we had a little call group we helped with. And I didn't get a whole lot from him. I got some because he was a busy guy. So I got some bleed off from him. It was exciting stuff like metatarsal fractures and toe problems, and not the kind of stuff a sports guy wants to do. I had to go out and do that on my own. But so I just was friendly and took call and did what I could. And I had a salary. It was a salary plus bonus. And once I reached a certain cap, I got to keep half of what I brought in, and that worked out. I got a little bit of a bonus the first year and more of a bonus the second year. And then I was able to buy in. And again, this was a while back. I bought in for a pretty hefty amount of money. That's the way it was back then. It was a 7-figure buy-in. I'm not sure I got 7 figures back out of it, but that's the way it worked out. So it took me 5 years to pay that off. And I got pretty busy, got reasonably established. And then all along, the whole time I was doing real estate, because I started this real estate thing in residency, or at least learning about it. And so within a few years of starting practice, after I had taken care of a few bills and Hope knew that my attention deficit wasn't going to affect my family. Once things were paid off, I started buying stuff. I started putting myself out there and started to work. It worked. And so again, like I said, as each month, each year went on, all I was trying to do was put an extra dollar in the asset column, something that was going to provide passive income while I wasn't doing surgery. It was going to come in while I was vacationing, playing with my kids, sleeping, with a drill. That was how that worked out. And so I stayed in private practice the whole time. I switched twice. I switched once about 13 years into my practice, did that for 15 years, and then was going to have to retire back in 19, but I found a group that said, come on and hang out with us. So I brought all my patients over there so that they'd have a good place to land whenever I left. And so that was it. I stayed three private practices. And the practice I just left, they just sold to private equity about a year ago.
Nice exit.
Challenging times. Would you still recommend young minds motivated to help and serve? Would you still recommend they go into healthcare? Is that viable still?
It depends on your motivations. I don't think anybody on this call probably got into medicine for money. I didn't. I doubt any of y'all did, because there's a lot better ways to make money. I think it's an honorable profession. I really enjoyed my time. It has its negatives. Every business you do is going to have its negatives. So I tell people would be my oldest daughter and my daughter and my son. So my daughter's a pediatrician. I gave her the good and the bad way back when. Of course, she saw how we were living. Not that we're the wealthiest people in the world, but she saw me a lot. I made sure I met the kids at the bus at 3:30 when they got off, and they were in elementary school. So I wanted to make sure I was there. So they saw that. And I told her, not everybody does that. By the time you're a doctor, most people are going to be employed. She weighed the evidence and decided to become a doctor. She says money's not that important. So I'm allowing her to figure the answer out to that. My son, I have given him the same thing. He's literally thinking about going into medicine or be a PA, desperately trying to get him to just stick with PA. So yeah, we need docs. Everybody on this call, you guys are going to get old. We want somebody that likes their job taking care of us when we're 75 years old. So yeah, I want some of those folks to stay in
I agree.
and
I,
take care of us.
I say we're all patients at the end of the day.
Exactly.
We can't get around that. We want happy and healthy doctors.
And you're right. And it's a great profession. And it's just, and if we, as Bio says, if we can have a little bit of autonomy, treat them like we're supposed to, or like we think we should treat them, it's pretty rewarding. Now, I'm not sure if the current environment's going to allow us to do that, but that's the Pollyanna thought, is that it'd be nice if you could treat people the way you've been trained to treat them and the way you know they want to be treated.
Well said.
Okay. So I have one more. In terms of real estate, what is your overall philosophy for investing in real estate? I know most people matches their goals with the kind of real estate they buy. Whether I also like you cash flow, are you more about equity, or you just diversify, and which kind of assets?
Gotcha. And things have changed too. Yeah, and you will change as your capital stack makeup changes. So will your needs or your wishes. If we go back to Robert's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? Everybody remember the diagram, the income statement and balance sheet. So bottom left is the asset box. So my philosophy was, I'll put anything in that asset box if it's going to make me $1 in passive income, hopefully 10, 100,000, whatever it's going to be. So I put anything I could in there, and it was vastly predominantly real estate, almost all real estate. And so my entire focus during that probably 10-year period was to create the passive income. And I did it. You look at what you make, or you look at what it costs you to live, and it's, man, that's Mount Everest, right? It's hard to do all that. How am I going to create so many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? It looks like a big task. As they say, chunk your goals down into smaller bite-sized pieces. I had everything on, my home stuff was on Quicken, right? Simple accounting software. I use QuickBooks for my other stuff, but this was our home stuff. So I could push a button at the end of the year. It would tell me what I spent on utilities, mortgage, groceries, vacation, all the categories, right? So as things were going along, I'd make a little bit of passive income, not life-changing, but if you added it all up, hey, I paid for my, one year I had made enough passive income to pay for my utilities. Pretty cool. I could check that off. And so hopefully the next year I could pay for, clothes for the kids, or mortgage, or school things, or taxes, or something like that. So that's why I stuck with passive income. It was mostly real estate. It was all primarily first in my portfolio. It was all personal stuff. And I had the typical problem where projects got bigger. I ran out of money. So I asked some friends, hey, do you want to go on this deal? And so we put some deals together, and then partners would come in. They'd bring a few of their friends. I'd bring a few of my friends. We'd do a bigger deal and just grow like that. All those projects were real estate. So once the passive income eclipsed my living expenses, I made sure that it eclipsed the expense that it took to have a life, which meant the travel and all the fun stuff. Then I actually kept that thought process. I was so deeply ingrained in passive income that I wouldn't buy gold or commodities. I wouldn't buy land because it didn't produce cash flow. Maybe I should have done some, maybe I could have or should have done some of that early. It worked out, but so that's why things change. Once you've got the passive income, then you take a few swings. And so I have bought land, I have bought gold, I take some swings on some high risk things, and surprise, some of them don't make it. So that changes. And I've certainly ventured outside of real estate now into a number of other asset classes and private equity and things like that. So that was a long answer, but it was pretty much all real estate and passive income. That was what was going to give me the autonomy I wanted, to use your word. And quite frankly, I just didn't want anybody telling me what to do. So if I had money coming in that nobody could stop, I could decide what I wanted to do with my life.
Yep.
You talked about things sometimes not working out, and that was actually my next question regarding some of the setbacks, some of the failures, which are, as we know, inevitable when you become an entrepreneur. Even as a physician, complications are inevitable. What would you say you would do differently from some of the bigger lessons that were learned?
It's as I look back at all the small and gargantuan mistakes or bad deals, it all boils down to people. We can all look at numbers. Everybody can learn how to underwrite stuff. You can always pass it off to you can hire somebody to underwrite a deal for you. So numbers are numbers. You just need to know where to be conservative and all that. And then you can take a flyer once in a while. You can take something that's high risk. Private equity deals, they're pretty high risk. A lot of the folks I hang around with, they invest in PE all the time, but a lot of them don't make it. And the hope is that one will out of 10, right? It all boils down to people, or it has for me. People, whether they're competent or worse, whether they're honest or criminal. And they're out there. Warren Buffett's quote is really ringing true. In fact, right now it's ringing true a little bit. Once the tide goes out, you find out who's swimming naked. And this happened back in the GFC as well. I think that's when Bernie Madoff might have gotten caught. It was back then. I don't mind taking a swing once in a while, but I would be much more diligent on the vetting, due diligence, and background checking of the people that are running the projects. That would have saved some trouble in the past.
Yep, as I'm part of the Real Estate Guys Mentoring Club based out in Dallas, and they always talk about third-party risk, and that includes people and potential partners.
Exactly, that counterparty risk.
Yep. And what are some of those more granular due diligence things that you can lean on now, specifically involving potential partners and people? What do you?
Yeah. There's the kind of high level ones, like, make sure they've got a good track record, talk to previous investors, things like that. That's pretty good stuff. It helps. Don't just invest because it's a pretty brochure or the deal looks good. That's what Robert says, the prettier the brochure, the crappier the deal. But go deeper when, it's really fact. It's nice to have proof, just like doctors. We like proof, don't we? We like evidence-based medicine and all that stuff. We want stuff that's proven. I like hard documents that come from third parties. Title searches that show they really own the property, audited financials, not just unaudited financials. Obviously, unaudited financials can be altered. I now have a long list of companies that do background checks. They will check adverse media, civil and criminal litigation, history, SEC violations, things like that. That's probably, you will sound like you're one of those hard to deal with investors. But I think it might have saved some trouble in the past for me and for some other people. Get a lot more diligent over time. But yeah, get some proof that what people say is true. And past investors are helpful. Old Bernie Madoff had a lot of happy past investors. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And you want to see if it's real estate, you want to see the thing or know somebody that's maybe walked the property.
I don't know if you remember, but I took a picture of one of the properties that I invested with you and sent it to you. I'm like, I like the progress, Tom. It looks great.
Yeah, real stuff. What is it? Hold the date, hold like the New York Times or something. It shows the date. Yes, this is really it. And because, criminals are tricky. They're tricky and they're out there. And so and if I go back to some stuff that we've done years ago, again, the problem was a person, and it was more of an ethics thing. They just decide they see opportunity, things like that. So there's a lot of deals out there. We all have greed. I can promise you every one of us has some greed. There's deals that look too good to be true, but are just nice deals with a high risk reward ratio. There's some deals that are too good to be true that just might be.
Yep, absolutely true. We have a question from Ifanyi. If you want to come off microphone, go for it.
Hey, Tom, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your wealth of experience with us. Just had a question. Generally, if you had a mentor that's a physician that's interested in doing this real estate, what would be some guidance or recommendations that you might make towards their jumping into real estate, especially considering like syndications?
Gotcha. Are you saying like investing in syndications or doing your own?
Investing in syndications and even progressing from there to becoming a part of the GP team.
Right on. Man, I'm a big fan of teams and networks. First, find out what you want to do, why you want to do it, and all that kind of stuff. We all want the money, but we want the money for different reasons, all of us. But then start getting around people that do it, because that's where you'll get ideas, you'll get motivation, you'll get investors or somebody to invest with. Try not to be just a lone ranger, because I was for quite a long time. It was great, but it didn't scale very much. It didn't scale until I asked somebody, hey, I like what you do. Will you teach me? So I literally asked somebody, worked for him for a year and a half, and surprisingly, something big came out of it. We weren't planning on doing a deal together. Get with somebody that's done what you've done, and they'll tell you all the mistakes they made. I know I tell people all the mistakes I made. It's the length of my arm, and it's not a fast game. That's one thing. If you're investing as a passive investor, do your diligence, make sure that you are comfortable with the sponsor or somebody that you know has been with them for a long, get some good diligence. Read, I tell you, the book is great. Brian Burke's book, The Hands-Off Investor, is an encyclopedic, I said that wrong 3 times. Encyclopedic book on how to vet sponsors. There's a lot of stuff in there. It's helpful. And if you get with good sponsors and they're good, honest people, once in a while, the market might take them down. Like COVID was really rough on some people, but just know who you're investing with. Then you can forget about that, cash the checks, and work on doing your own thing. And when you're working on doing your own thing, get with people that are doing it. I like partners. I always say I got my success because I was partnered with people smarter than I was. And they probably would agree that I partnered with somebody smarter than I was. But that's a good way to go. It's nice to do it together because you see different things too. You'll see something that he or she doesn't see, he or she'll see something you don't see. And then be patient, active patience. Keep doing something every day, but it takes time. It's not going to grow real fast, but it's going to do that geometric thing if you give it enough time.
Nice.
Thank you.
But
Thanks, Afani. We're in a very interesting landscape now, considering the macroeconomics and investing. And like you said, we're always students and we're always learning lessons. What are you learning about this, I would even say, unique landscape? What could you share? What kind of advice, as you learn, could you give possibly?
man, back when times were good, a lot of people were talking about fixed debt, things like that, and proper and conservative underwriting and things like that. So those that did that are not so worried right now because everything's going okay for them. But when you have 12 years of good times and free money, it's going to hit that greed button again. And so it's going to be okay to take some variable debt. And that's a bit of a roulette wheel. You never know if it's going to come up red or black. And try to fix your debt, try to fix as many variables as possible. So that's one thing. Because rising interest rates, they're high right now, but they're not that high. I bought my first house at 10% interest. It worked. So the market will normalize. The prices and the interest rates are going to stabilize at some point. But I have found that when times go bad, people that are not as experienced or not as competent are some of the ones that are swimming naked. And this is when they get flushed out. You know, I remember back in 2008 to 10, a lot of great deals came up. I think we're going to have some good deals come up. We're seeing them now. It's not going to be the bloodbath I think that the GFC was, but there's going to be some good deals. I think every time I take a swing, it's just like that private equity ratio. You buy 10 deals, one of them eventually goes big to take care of all the ones that went flat or went bad. That's what happens with flyers. And I think that's what people during good times try to set up deals that might not do well when things turn down. So conservatism, I'm rambling a little bit here, but just try to use the sound principles each time you underwrite stuff. The reason I say that is there are times when I haven't done that. So that's why I'm telling you this. Get with somebody that's made a lot of mistakes. I'm one of them, tons.
No, still all worthwhile pearls to hear. I love the idea of when times get a little sticky, it's also good time to just invest in other people, invest in community. And I know you're doing that. You've created a mastermind. You just recently had an event where you brought people together. Right. So you're creating the space for people to learn from each other when things get crazy in the markets, right?
Yeah, that's where I'm in a lot of those things myself. I spend a lot of money and time each year going because we all don't know what we don't know. And I always learn something every time I'm in those meetings, just no matter what group it is. So I'm a big fan of masterminds or networks or people together because somebody might say, George, and I know that guy. Why don't you better be careful. I knew that guy 10 years ago. Or did you think about looking at those rental increases? Rent's not going to go up 6% a year. That's pretty optimistic. It's just little things like that. It's so nice to have a third party looking over your shoulder or even looking together with you. I believe community and masterminds are very helpful.
I wanted to go back to your experience building out this almost dual, not almost, exactly a dual career. You're a physician, orthopedic surgeon. You're also a investing principal. That partnership you even mentioned in your book, the first partner that you really choose and settle on should be your spouse. I'm curious to know how that played into everything. Even the kids, some folks have kids involved in their investing business. Did that play a role at all for you?
No, it didn't. And I'm always impressed at the people that are really teaching their kids the business and everything. Kenny, we talked about Kenny. He's got his kid working in his business, things like that. So I tried. The good news is my wife, my spouse, she lets me do what I do. And she tried to get into it. And we decided it was better if I just did it. And she took over the house stuff, but she was bought in enough that I go do my thing. I've seen a lot of teams, husband, wife, spouse teams that really do well. It's so nice to have two people. So you got to at least have that other person not pulling you down. I guess that's what I meant when I said it in the book. It's tough when you're out there, you're doing deals and some go well, some go bad, and there's work to it, right? That's hard enough as your physician. You come in, you have good days, bad days, right? So if you come home and your spouse is just dragging you down about what you're doing, that's a tough cookie to eat. So you want them to have some sort of support for you. And that was helpful. Kid-wise, yeah, I'll just tell you, do as I say, not as I do. I tried to teach the kids and they weren't interested. They're getting more interested now, but they're like probably the age some of y'all are on this call. The teacher was there. The student never really appeared, and that's a real honest answer. So I think it's great to get your kids involved. I think mine have quite a ways to go. They're great people. Both of them are great people, but in the financial world, understanding that, it hadn't really caught on yet. Take that as a warning. Get your kids to play cash flow with them or something like that.
Great game. Great board game. Bai, I think you were about to ask a question.
At first, I was going to ask more how you stay up to date. Just like in the medicine, you have a way to catch up with articles, journals, like how you stay up to date. But it seems like part of it was mastermind. But just in general, because there's so many news out there, so many opinions. So how do you basically stay up to date with the trends?
Yeah, I curate the feeds that I get. And some of my lists I look at for a long time. I get Walker and Dunlop. I get Newmark's Market Outlook. I think there's several multifamily deals that some are national, some are just Texas. I got a thing in Texas called Texas Recon or whatever. It talks about all the deals that are going on in Texas. And so with all that, I get statistics on multifamilies, this much underbuilt or this many less starts this year. I can get all those statistics. They're in front of my eyes every day. Also, I can get a feel for kind of a macro. This one that I get, it's usually got about 5 or 6 articles, and it'll talk about transactions primarily or new laws or rules or something like that. It's pretty good. And there was a time way back when every article was so-and-so LLC picks up so many units of apartments. Their plan is to rehabilitate the property, value add real estate. Everything was value add real estate. Then you could see it shift. Before people were talking about, you could see it shift to industrial, and you could see it shift to storage. It's a subtle thing, but just on that thing that I've read for 20 years, you can just see what's in vogue and you can see what transactions are happening. I also listen to various people. I had a short stint of listening to somebody talk about crypto. I couldn't understand it, so I stopped doing it. But I listened to some macroeconomic folks. Of course, podcasts. George talks a lot about macroeconomics. Peter Zion, I take his feed. He talks about the Ukraine war most of the time. But I like to stay a little bit in touch with world events that might potentially affect our real estate back home. Things do affect what's going on at home when they happen in the world. Yeah, it's just a whole truckload of that stuff coming through my email. Sometimes I just click and delete. Sometimes I read them, just depends. If I'm writing an article on real estate or something, of course, all of a sudden the multifamily ones they stay in the box. I read them a little closer. I pick up on the stats, things like that. But you got to stay in the market to know what's going on. Plus, I got a staff at the office that's constantly reading. They're constantly talking to brokers. And we have a team meeting every week on Mondays. So I get downloads from them as to what's going on, who's doing what. So it's just a big milieu of stuff.
I have one more question, and then I'll read this. Actually, I'll read this one first. Someone asked, how do you structure your real estate portfolio? Do you have a holding LC or management LC or like a main umbrella LC?
Gotcha.
Like, how do you
Good
do it?
question. Good question. My org chart it just looks like an ad for attention deficit. It's just the way it's grown. In general, I have several LLCs. I have one, Dr. Ani asking about passive investing. I have one that's just limited liability shares. So there's no outside risk. If anything goes bad with what I've invested in, I just lose that investment. So that's all not at risk stuff. I have another one that holds a lot of the real estate that I bought myself. And so this was a long time ago. Most of these are limited partnerships with a manager. And you asked about the structure. Now, when we set something up, typically it's an LLC with a managing LLC. So we usually, like at Presario, we create 2 LLCs for every project. We put a bubble around it so that it doesn't affect, so that there's just no way it can affect other projects. You can take that to all kinds of extremes, or you can really simplify things. There's not a right or wrong. It's a lot easier to have sort of one managing entity and a bunch of smaller LLCs, or then you go the other route. For the most protective thing is to have every project or every piece of real estate, the most protected you can get is to have each one of those in an LLC. So that's a little hard to manage. But almost everything I do is through some sort of entity. Occasionally I'll invest personally. Of course, in oil and gas, I'll invest personally, at least for the first year. But yeah, pretty much everything runs through an entity. And it's, again, I have way too many now, way too many.
Yeah, it's the same issue. Yeah, almost every deal sometimes even have the limited partner in one LLC, and sometimes the general partner, and then you have the management LLC. Yep. So sometimes you do 3, but LLC for sure. So to protect the investors and the project.
Yeah, LLCs were actually new when I started. So I know it ages me, doesn't it? But so that's why I started with limited partnerships, but now they're LLCs. They work. If you take care of them, you do the right things, you do the documentation. So if somebody ever asks for your books and records, you've got records of the meetings and things like that. And there's benefits to having LLCs. They have expenses. They have to have an office, things like that. There's tax benefits. But yeah, I've gone through simplification and granularity phases. So I think I'm now in another granular phase. I have too many of them. So my bad.
Thanks. I have one more. And then, so in terms of, this is almost like a personal one. There's 2 different rule of thought, right? In terms of real estate syndication. Most people really believe you should just pick one thing, right? That you do best, right? And basically partner with everything else, right? And I started like you, I started doing my own deals, right? And ultimately end up being like kind of operator / asset management.
Yep.
So then basically do everything. And then I started hiring people into each role, but I still feel confident, more secure, doing everything under the same umbrella rather than partner for each individual part of the deal. Some people will join together and they have a different group do the underwriting, a different group doing asset management, a different group doing different things. And then there'll be a different group that do the fundraising. So which are you vertically integrated, or did you just focus on one particular part?
Oh, I see. I thought you were talking like focus on one asset class or something like that. Big fan of that for sure. Despite the fact that I'm the poster child for AD, we pretty much focused on apartments. But yeah, for me, for my deals early on, of course, I just bought them for myself. But when there were investors involved, yes, we did all of it. And we pretty much do that even in our company. There was a time we don't have anybody yet. We don't outsource any of that. So I guess vertically integrated in that sense would be yes. We were the operators, we were the developers. We've morphed a little bit from developers and operators now to more PE, but yeah, we did most all of it. So now we actually probably have changed a little bit. So now we'll tend to bring in debt equity, asset management, whatever's needed. But sometimes we'll work with somebody where they do the asset management. They might even get the debt. We bring the equity, just depends. So we've actually focused a little tighter and fractioned that a little bit. We do both. Sometimes it's all ours. We own land. We bring in some and we bring in a partner.
I say that mainly because, like you said, the weakness, right? You need partners, but yet most people that when things go wrong, it's always the partners also. So it's like a line you have to walk. How many, you have partners, but tighten the circle, right? So
Yeah.
basically partner very sparingly.
You're talking partner versus somebody that works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's picking partners is tough. I've hit it right a few times and I've hit it wrong a few times. As a company at Presario, we've hit it right a lot of times. We've hit it wrong a few times. Partners are really important and they're really hard to get a good one and keep one. So yeah, you find somebody good because as you're saying, if you have 5 partners and one does the capital raising, one does the asset management and all that, it can work, but now you've got 5 people that got to agree on something. It could be that maybe one does the raising and you do something else and you hire out somebody to do the underwriting, things like that. Yeah, the more people the more the human factor comes into play, and you just got to make sure everybody knows how to work together.
Thanks.
We are almost exactly at the hour. So in consideration of everyone's time, I definitely want to let everyone go for the holiday weekend here. Tom, I want to thank you. If no one has any other burning questions, we're going to sign off here. First, though, Tom, is there any way folks can reach out to you if they have any more questions? I'm sure there are a lot of doctors on here who have doctor questions and investing questions. So
yeah, I'll see if I can remember the doctor questions, and I'll lie to you about the investing questions. Just joking. So yeah, you can, I got a website, it's richdoctor.com. It's actually going through some sort of rehab right now. I'm not sure. Somebody else is doing that. But you can send me an email, especially this group. You can send an email to tom@richdoctor.com. I send most people to hello@richdoctor.com, but y'all are welcome to send it directly to me. I get both of them. So be happy to answer questions.
awesome. We appreciate it. And we appreciate the hour, the wealth of information. We definitely look forward to chatting again and just keeping communication lines open. Just as a quick note and promotion here, in 2 weeks, we're going to have our next biweekly webinar. That's June 10th. So we hope to see many of you back again. We're going to be talking with a Dallas-based syndication group called NHK. They also do EB5, which is special programs, government-run programs that allows for international sources of funding and investing. So I think that's going to be very informative. And so that will be in 2 weeks. But like I said, if no one has any more questions, I'm going to definitely let everyone go. It's been a great hour. Tom, thank you again. Bio, thank you again. And that will wrap up our program for tonight.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the holiday weekend.
Everyone.